Hey everyone, what's up and welcome back to another rig review. I'm Sir Wade in case you're new here, and today we're going to be checking out Sam and Amy, two character rigs for Maya made by Gabriel Salas, but he's also the guy who created the David and Dana rigs, which I have yet to review on this channel. That's coming very, very soon. If you want to download these characters, I'll have a link down below to the Gumroad page where he's selling them. Sam and Amy, Dave and Dana, each of these rigs is $15. And today we answer the question, are they worth it? Spoiler, I'm going to say yeah. And I have been playing with these live on Twitch for the past couple of streams, so if you want to be a part of all that and ask questions and have a conversation, hang out with me over on Twitch 3 days a week. Link is in the description below. And if you want me to buy and test more rigs to find out if they're worth the price, let me know down below what rigs you have in mind, and also consider supporting the Patreon, also linked below, because it's thanks to my wonderful patrons that I'm able to make videos like this, and buy rigs, and buy tools, and test some stuff out, which we do on Twitch and here on YouTube. So yeah. All right, enough talk. Let's get into Maya. Let's test out these rigs. The first thing I should say is that this version of the rigs is version 1.0, so no updates have been made at the time of me making this video. They may be different when you're watching. If you're watching later, there may have been some changes. If the textures aren't connecting properly, that's normal. Check in the FAQ folder of the files that you download, and if you follow those steps, it'll take just 2 or 3 minutes and you'll be good to go. And the last bit of housekeeping is that if you want these rigs to look really nice as you're posing them, I do recommend you check out this video that I made in the past, how to make your animations look better in 5 minutes or less. It really doesn't take that long. It's literally 5 minutes or less. There's a lot of controls that open up right off the bat that I kind of wish didn't all show up right at once. And I'm going to show you which controls I recommend you generally hide until you need them. If we go to the root control of each of the characters, you'll see that they each have kind of the same properties over here on the right. So we can actually select both characters at once if you happen to be using both. And I'm going to turn off arrow visibility, bend, finger, and these aim controls. I'm going to turn off the aim visibility here and the FK/IK visibility because we don't need that just yet. That clears up a lot of the body controls. Now if we zoom into the face, I'm going to grab these big panels, and these both we can do the same time as well. I'm going to turn off A through C controls, and I'm going to turn off the squash, rubber, and render spheres. Now one thing I wish we could change is I don't like how you can't turn off the hair visibility because I'm not going to be using the hair during blocking, but I wish there were a few more visibility settings that hopefully make it into the future versions of these rigs. Now I think these rigs look the best and work the best if you smooth them out before animating them. Let me show you what I mean. If we toggle the R checkbox, it turns it from reference to just regular geometry. We can select it now. If you hit 3 on your keyboard, it will smooth out the geometry. Let's take a tour through the rigs. I have some things I really like about them, and I do have some notes that I hope get changed in future versions, so we're gonna get into all of that now. So let's start our tour with Amy. We'll start at the root, and we have a few different things. So obviously we have the ability to move, rotate, and scale her rig as a whole. One thing I noticed is that if you scale her really small, it doesn't seem like this button on her pants is totally connected, so it'll get giant, and her eyebrows get a little bit funky too. If you have a really, really small set, consider making the set bigger rather than the rig smaller, because you might run into some weird issues. Sam is pretty much the same issue, so just don't try to put them in a tiny little environment. And if you do happen to get in really close to these characters, you'll notice that their texture detail is really nice. If you look at Sam's shoes, he has all this kind of like lace cloth detailing, that skin crackly looking leather texture, and even the bottom of the shoes have scuffs and scratch marks and things like that. The two things that we have turned on at the top are FK and IK visibility. These just turn on anything that has FK or anything that has IK active on it. So in our case right now, the arms are in FK. So if I turn on and off FK, you can see that it's toggling the torso, the arms, all the way up to the head, because they're all using that chain. If I adjust the FK, it'll turn on and off the feet, because they're currently in IK, and also apparently the hair. So let's take a look at the feet first. There are the big blocks that are the kind of main controls that you can move, you can rotate, do all that stuff. In the hidden sections, we have a swivel, which is kind of like a knee pivot rotate, and then you have toe, just to move the toe, and a roll to move from the heel. That's what you use for your walk cycles. Something I really like about the foot controls though, are that if you move it up, if you feel like her foot is peeling up off the ground too early, you have this roll angle control that you can adjust. And if we take this up to like 70 degrees, you can see that it'll roll really far before eventually peeling up. Probably too far. That's a broken ankle. That does not look like it's comfortable, but the idea is that you have some flexibility, that if we up the roll angle to like 40 degrees, you can see that it goes pretty far without finally peeling the toe off the ground. The stretchy control is that if you go too far and it doesn't allow you to go that way, you can turn on the stretchiness, which will then let you put the foot wherever you want, and it'll stretch the leg. There's an anti-pop control, which is really interesting. I am still working on exactly how this works. I imagine that has something to do with walk cycles and keeping the knee from popping. I haven't done a walk cycle with this, so I don't know exactly how you use it. And if you know what it does in more detail, please leave a comment down below. Also, there is a length 1 for the upper leg and a length 2 to extend the bottom leg. You can also shrink them if you want shorter legs, but that will break the geometry, so you probably won't go backwards, you'll only extend. Hold control while modifying this attribute, and it'll go a lot slower Still, you'll probably break it eventually. So use it for just small cheats, nothing too crazy. If you use these rotation rings around the foot, they're actually pivot points to move and rotate the foot, the heel, toe, and the ball of the foot. Now let's switch over to Sam for the upper body. If we go to the hip control, you have these arrows, which you can use to physically move him around the space. That's how you'll have him, walking forward. There are a few interesting hidden controls. For example, center between feet. So if you spread a foot to be really, really far away and you want him to be perfectly centered, his center of mass evenly distributed between his feet, you can actually turn on center between feet and it'll put him right in the middle. I'm very curious to see how different people are going to use this in different ways. Now as for the FK spine, I'm actually not sure why this is. But if you notice, they're not flat. They're not like perfectly even. So when you rotate something like this kind of mid-section control, you can be set to object mode, component mode, or gimbal mode, and they all show that the object is rotated by default. So you're getting a different type of twist than you'd probably expect. I'm not sure if that was intentional or if that's a good or a bad thing. Something I find really weird is if you go up one more control, this one doesn't actually seem to line up the rotation axis with the actual control. You can see how this first one lines up pretty well. This next one also lines up pretty well, even though it's not flat. But this middle one at the lower part of the rib cage, it doesn't match. I feel like that's a rigging mistake, but I'm not sure. I don't think I'm a fan of how those are set up. Now, the one I really noticed is that if you go up to the top of the head, the top of the IK chain, it's very, very different than the other ones, but I can kind of see why. If you rotate his head, he doesn't just swivel left and right. He kind of goes up and to the side, which is kind of how we turn our heads. When we turn our heads, usually our chin is a little bit farther pointed than the tops of our heads, just because it's a little bit uncomfortable to just turn your head or to go the other way. That feels very unnatural. If you try to do that, tilt your head the direction that you're gonna turn, kind of hurts the back of your neck. So this will automatically give you a slightly more natural head turn, but that's a question of whether or not you want that to be a decision made by the computer or not. For beginners, it's going to help you to get a better pose without having to think about it, but it's also not going to teach you that with a lot of rigs, you need to do that yourself. So is it a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know, but I wanna make sure you're aware of it. Now, if you don't wanna have that happen, you can switch to world space mode so that when you rotate something, it does just go straight to the side. The thing is, when you rotate things in world space, if you look at the top right corner of the channel box, I'm actually moving 3 different axes of rotation, even though I'm only spinning the one. Which, by the way, if this is just happening to you in everyday life, you might want to check your tool settings to make sure you're not in world space. It's probably not the best way to be when you're rotating things and trying to keep your curves clean. Because now you have 3 different curves influencing a head turn when you maybe only wanted one. In case you're wondering where this lives, it's the top right corner, this little hammer and 3 lines. And it will change depending if you're in translate, rotate, or scale. You'll see that each one of these has its own settings. Here's another thing that I think needs to be changed in the future version, and this is an easy fix. I bet this will be updated in another release at some point. But right now I have the upper body in FK, so forward kinematics. I have a video on that if you need some help understanding which one's which. But if I'm rotating the arm kind of joint by joint, this is FK, I have the shoulder control up at the top, which is very important not to forget the shoulder control because it's a huge part of moving your arms. And it's the #1 reason you're gonna have issues if you try to move the arms up and it looks really funky. It's because you forgot the shoulders. But here's one of the things. If you wanna switch the arms with these rigs to IK instead of FK, what we'll do is we'll go back to the root at the bottom, we'll turn on FK IK visibility, and that turns on these little pluses, these little crosshairs. And that's his right arm, his left arm, his body, and then each leg. They all have an FK IK switch. So if we switch, for example, his body and his left arm are right, using the FK IK blend, we turn it from 0 to 10, it'll switch his body and his arm to IK. Now, the problem I was trying to describe, if you have FK and IK turned on at all times, you won't notice this problem. But let's just say you turn the entire body to IK for some reason. I know I did that a lot when I was a student, and I'm trying to consolidate controls. If I go back to the root and I turn off the FK visibility, I'm gonna go ahead and pose out this arm. Now, let's just say I want him to reach up into the air, but there's no shoulder control. The shoulder control doesn't flip between FK and IK, or at least it doesn't display when you're using IK. So in order to see the shoulder control, I have to go back and turn on the FK visibility to get that, which is kind of weird. I hope that gets fixed, because if I'm using IK arms and I want to turn off everything else, I want to be able to see the shoulder control regardless of which arm skeleton I'm in. Then in terms of the IK body, you get these 3 blocks that some of them you can rotate to adjust stuff, some of them you can't. It's just the middle one you can't. You use this one to kind of change the curvature of the spine, and the top 2 change the overall shape. For the hips control, if you're using IK, this rotates the lower body, the hips. But if you're an FK, you'll use this yellow thing. This is actually the hip control. For the IK arms, nothing too crazy. You move these around, there you go. There's a stretchy if you need to stretch his arm. So if we move the body, obviously the arms don't move because they are in IK. But if you're using IK and you want to have a little bit more natural motion of like, you know, the hands kind of getting dragged a little bit, you can use the follow control, and we'll turn this all the way up. But now you're kind of in like torso space, if you know what that means. So if I move this around, it's actually moving as if it's an FK, even though we're using an IK system. So what I'll do is I'll change the follow to just like 1. So it's gonna inherit like 10% of the motion of the body into that hand. So if I move this around, you're gonna see there is actually some movement with that hand. It's not as much movement, but it's something. Use that if you need to build in some ambient motion with your IK. Just know that your curves are gonna have to get a little bit more complicated because you're gonna be mixing inputs from what you're animating with the hand and then what the body's doing. It can get tricky. So if you haven't mastered FK and IK on their own, I wouldn't recommend blending stuff like this and then trying to animate if you're a beginner, just because it can get hard to troubleshoot and keep track. And the next thing that I wanna show you is back in the root, we had the drive system visible. That is these little kind of lines on the hands. In the side here that you have a spread macro, you have cupping, which I'm actually not a huge fan of how the cupping works. I wish it had some effect on the pinky, the ring finger, and the middle finger all to various degrees so that it cups the hand a little bit more naturally than just folding it in half. Because if you were to cup the hand trying to get a more natural pose and then you take these curls and then move them, the fingers intersect pretty aggressively. So personally, if I were gonna do just a single pose with the hands, maybe I might use that a little bit. But honestly, like if I were animating, I probably would not use this drive system. You don't have a ton of control. I've seen better hand systems, but if you want to animate the fingers yourself, that's actually not that bad. You just go back to the root, turn on the finger visibility, and then if you're not seeing anything, you have to make sure you're in FK visibility. It has to be turned on because those are technically FK joints, which is another thing I kind of wish you didn't have to turn on. But once it's on, you have all the control that you need. If I go into the wireframe mode, you can see there's a few controls that are kind of buried in the hand. You can't see them very well unless you're on the back of the hand, but otherwise you have everything you need to do the exact finger pose that you're gonna want. Something you're definitely gonna wanna know is that the upper arms and the head have a global control to change the space. So what I mean is, if I rotate her around, see how her head and her arms just follow like they're glued on, like a popsicle stick, she just kind of moves all as one unit. That's not how we normally like to move. If you have your arms out in front of you and you rotate, your arms and your head kind of stay level, versus being, you know, pulled around like a puppet. We're gonna wanna change that. We go to the upper arms in the FK skeleton, and we take global, put global all the way up to 10. We'll also do the same thing with the head. We'll just take the head control, go to global, go to 10. Now when I rotate the body, you'll see that her head and her arms try to maintain the exact position that they had. You can even take the head and go to 8 or 9, something like that, so that when you rotate her, she keeps her head level, but there is a little bit of motion that is being inherited in rotation from the body. There's the bend visibility, which are all these like spiky controls. These are your bend bows. These are gonna give you shape control to really customize the shape of each limb if you need to push it further. Now let's get into the faces, where all the fun stuff is. So, the different controls we have by default. So I turned off a few of the things, remember? And again, I wish we could turn off the hair and these circles here and the ear controls, because we don't generally need those for blocking. I'd like to save those for later. But this circle is basically like an eye control. They will translate the actual position of her eyes, move where the skin of the eyelids is gonna be, or you can also scale it if you need to, I don't know, make her eyes wider, squash and stretch, you can use those. So base controls, you'll notice that the thing that she's looking at, this aim control, it actually doesn't do anything by default because her eyes are normally set to just follow this panel. Now they're not labeled, so you're gonna have to kind of go through here, look at the name, and then memorize what they do. Eyebrows are the top ones, up and down, left is mean, right is sad, basically. And if you go in a circle, you get this. Now, if you feel like you're not getting enough out of these expressions, you can turn off the limits, which will allow you to put these as far as you want in any direction, which, you know, use with caution. There are some hidden controls, for example, the squeeze control, so compressing these down together, the outers up and down, so if you need to push that up into the air. And if you feel like you're not getting enough, if you need to go farther on the squeeze, you can actually take this value and type in a new value, and you've just created a very strange unibrow. So it's the same with the limits. You can push the channel box values further than it lets you drag, if you really need to. Next one down, that's the eyes. So that will move the eyes around and the lids will actually react to it. But this is the reason that the aim control doesn't do anything when we move it, because it's following this kind of FK system instead of the IK aim. If you want to change that, all you need to do is click on the aim control and change it to say aim, turn it on. And now you'll get this thing to take over. Follow is currently set to on, so if I rotate the head, you can see that her eyes stay locked in the same place. That aim control moves as if it's parented to the head. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn the follow off. It goes back to wherever its world position was. So I'll move it back to its location. And if I move the head, you can see that she actually stays locked onto whatever point she was looking at before, because that thing is no longer parented to the head. Once again, we could turn this to 2 or something, and you could get about 20% of that motion so that you get a little bit, and she tries to stay in the same spot, but it's not exact. I would recommend trying a few options, seeing what you like. You have several controls in here. You have a blink control. The convenience of the blink control is very nice, but if you watched my how to do a blink video, I usually err on the side of doing very, very little with the lower lid. I feel like in this case, the lower lid does a little bit too much of the work. I don't love this pose. That's just me. And you can slightly adjust it. With the blink center, you can push it down a tiny bit. You can go up quite a bit. So if you're looking for the same level of control that I am, you can use the upper lid control and manually push it. Again, it'll stop at 10, which is where the blink kind of stopped, but you can type in a new value of, say, 15's too far, maybe 12. So you can push it down to 13 or something. That's probably what I'd go to. I'd go to 13. And so the lower lid, you can go back and you can try to match it. And you can do it in the graph editor too. If you don't want to type in values, you can just move it in the graph editor. And just to finish this out, we have the squint control. So that's this. And if you, again, wanted to push that further, you could, but just don't go too far, it might get weird. You have the iris, so you can change the size of the iris, and the same with the pupil. So if you want to make her look a little bit less warm, you can make that smaller, or a little bit more emotional, you can bring that up to connect with the character more. If you were in my recent Twitch stream where I was testing out this rig live with you guys, and we were talking about it, and we were testing things, you may remember this. And if you don't go to my Twitch streams, it's a great resource. You should definitely come and check it out, ask questions. We discover a lot of things about the rigs when we do it together. And I was using the upper and lower lid controls just like this, but the moment I started scrubbing to try and preview it or to hit play or whatever, it wasn't deforming the geometry. Even though the graph editor, the curves, the value of the keys, all the data in Maya was accurate, the viewport wasn't reflecting what I told it to do. It's not just these rigs that have the issue. I've been using a lot of different rigs that I've had issues with this. Here's the fix. If you go to the bottom right corner, go to the man running from the Gear of Death, your animation preferences. If you change in the animation tab, your evaluation mode from parallel, which is what you normally want to be in, to DG, but basically it's going to use less of your computer's resources. It's going to be a slower performance to play stuff back, but it will be more accurate. Next one is the mouth, which is interesting because up and down is opening and closing. Left is like ooh things, like bringing in the corners, and right is smiling, which I think is kind of strange that it goes to smile versus just kind of a neutral thing. Now, if you want to move the corners of the mouth, that's these bottom two. That will allow you to change it to be a more neutral expression. But again, this left and right is making it smiling and frowning. If I were doing lip sync, I probably wouldn't use these sliders. I'm gonna actually go back into this main panel, turn on A, B, and C visibility, and I'm gonna animate all the stuff manually, at least for the most part, because I wanna make sure I can maintain that control with clean curves and not have to worry too much about it. So here, I can move this up and down, but that said, there are some really powerful tools in here that you can't ignore either. So if I open the mouth, you'll see that there are actually a few controls that are essential to be able to roll the lip up and down, and sticky lips to be able to close the lips, but have, you know, the mouth, the jaw open, but the lips stay together. Huge for chewing or different lip sync shapes. Now, a few last notes on the eyes. If you are going to manually pose out the eyes, there's a few things you should know. One, and this is something that I hope can get updated with the rig, if you want to move it kind of up and to the side, you absolutely can. If you want to try and pull it out for very push shapes, you're not able to. There's like a geometry constraint or something that's keeping this sliding around the eye. I don't love the way that, like, I could use X and Y to go up this way, which is maybe what I want, but if I try to use Z, it actually seems to do X and Y type stuff. It doesn't let me just pull it out in Z space. So that's weird, and I want to change that. If that can be put into the rig feedback for the next versions, please, I'd love that. And this is something that'll definitely be fixed in the next version. If you look at this control, it's connected. If you look at the counterpart on her left side, it's actually not connected to the geometry. This happens in a lot of rigs. I'm not really worried about this. This will get updated and fixed in the next version. I'm sure people have pointed this out. And I forgot to mention that this red control down here moves the entire mouth as a whole, not including the teeth, help get shapes and fun little creases in the cheeks and things like that. This red one down here will move the chin, so you can see just the chin geometry. And then this control down here is the jaw. So you can rotate it, and you can also use translation if you need to maintain some jaw structure, which is really nice. And then just to blaze through what I haven't gotten yet, this video is long enough already. Thanks for sticking around this long. Hope this is helpful. If I go back to the main control panel thing for the face, I'm gonna turn on the squash control visibility, which gives you these 3 blocks. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off all the face controls so we can see a little bit better. You get this top one, which is gonna give you kind of like a lattice. And actually you can turn on the lattice. So if you go to the top control of the squash, you can see the lattice visibility. This is actually what you're adjusting. You can squash things, you can see how the squash and stretch works. And this middle one will kind of change the angle, and the bottom one moves where the actual lattice is. Funky fisheye lens looking effect. You can take this and you can use it to just kind of apply that effect to different parts of the rig. I don't know why you would do this. Maybe you're animating her looking in a wine glass or something. I don't know, I'm just guessing, and like you needed to adjust based on refraction and you're trying to fake it with animation. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up. But you can rotate this and tweak it, and maybe you're just looking for something really, really trippy. I don't know, there you go. And of course I haven't messed with them, but you've seen them the whole time. The hair controls, those all work. Oh, and the yellow controls on the back of your head. I should probably mention, these controls are kind of upper and lower face squash stretch type things. You can use them to do the same thing. You can reshape parts of the face. You can go a little crazy, but they're like smear frame thingies. So to answer the question, are these rigs worth $15? Heck yes. Absolutely, 100%. These are really, really good rigs. I do have obviously some notes about them, but that's with any creative project, and this is version 1.0. I don't know when the next versions are coming out, and I'm sure that other people have discovered some of these things too, and a lot of this will be either updated, changed, fixed, some things may not be, who knows. But either way, these are really, really appealing. They're very easy to use, very intuitive, and so I think they're definitely worth it. If you want to download them, there is a link down below, like I said, and somebody asked me on the Twitch stream recently if you have to pay for updated versions of the rig, and the answer is of course no, definitely not. When new versions of these types of rigs come out, if you bought it from the Gumroad link that's down there, you get an email anytime that there's an update and you go download the new version of the file. So hopefully this was helpful, and again, if you enjoy these types of videos and you want me to try out new rigs, let me know what down below you've been wondering about, rigs that you want to know whether it's worth the cost. And also please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. It's how I can buy all these rigs and test all these tools and stuff like that. There's a link to Patreon down below. But I hope this was helpful and that you make amazing stuff with these rigs. Don't forget to tag the creator with the hashtags that he put for each of these rigs, and tag me in anything you make. I'd love to see it. But that's it for me. Thank you all so much for watching all the way to the end. I do appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video.